So, guys, we have a great story coming up, and it's on forgiveness. You know what I've come to understand is as we go through that wilderness, the same thing that dries us out, God flips it over
Hmm.
and refreshes us. So think of forgiveness in your life, those relationships you've had, and you have some bitterness or something, but when that comes back together and forgiveness occurs, it's a refreshment like no other. And this week I'm in the book of Genesis, and it's one of the most classic forgiveness stories. It's Jacob and Esau, right? Um, Jacob had stolen Esau's blessing, the older brother's blessing, and Esau was so mad he was going to kill his brother. Talk about a bitterness, a root of bitterness in a family. So Jacob takes off, running north away from his brother. He's going to go live up there for years. His mom
Hiding
tells,
behind his wives.
yeah. So he's going to go up there for years until his brother cools off, and then he can come back, and hopefully his brother will forgive him. So he leaves his father's home. He leaves Isaac's home. But what's amazing in Scripture before that, Jacob would refer to God as my father's, as my dad's God,
Hmm.
Isaac's God. He would never refer to God as my God. So he's on the road. He's by himself, running away from his brother who's trying to kill him. And he pulls over for the night, and he's in such a bad spot. He takes a rock and he uses it as a pillow. Think of that rock in your life right now. That's your pillow. That thing that's drying you out. And that's Jacob on the side of the road sleeping on a rock. And God gives him this amazing vision of heaven that night with his head on the rock. And this is what Jacob says. This is what Jacob says when he wakes up. Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He took that very rock that was under his head, giving him discomfort, that rock in his life, that unforgiveness. He now takes that rock out from under his head and he places it up as a pillar. He called the place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, "If God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I may return safely to my father's house, then the Lord will be my God, and
Hmm.
this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house. And of all that you give me, Lord, I will give you a tenth." So that unforgiveness, that story of driving Jacob through the wilderness, laying on the rock, led him to go from God being his father's God to God being his God. And so it's just a beautiful story. The forgiveness had not happened yet in that story. It's coming in a few chapters, and I
Hmm.
can't wait to get there. But forgiveness in our lives, bitterness in our lives, can flip over and refresh us. I had a story in my own life in business. There was a man who did just some awful things to me. I'd worked hard, done business, I thought, God's way. And he came in, just turned everything upside down. And I was in a state of bitterness. I didn't know how to forgive this guy. I didn't know what to do, but he was eating me up. This guy owned me all day, every day, all night, couldn't sleep. I was bitter. And so a Christian brother said, "I think you should pray for him." So I did. I prayed for him. He was a private pilot, and I prayed that his carburetor in his airplane would plug up. God didn't answer that prayer. So then that same brother said, "Well, maybe you should, witness to him and lead him to the Lord." And I said, "Man, I am not going to spend eternity in heaven with that guy. No
Hmm.
way." But God had another plan. I just continued to seek the Lord. I continued to abide in his word. And day went by day, month by month, year by year. I think God started to heal my heart and forgive him. And I knew that someday I would find him somewhere. We would run, our paths would cross, and I always wondered how I would react. And finally that day happened. I'm walking in a parking lot one direction, and he's walking in a parking lot the other direction. There was nowhere I could go. And God just overwhelmed me with forgiveness. And I
Hmm.
put my hand out and I said, "John, how are you doing, brother? I haven't seen you for a long time. I hope things are well." And remember in the Bible where it says it's like heaping hot coals on someone's head? His eyes got so big and so scared.
Hmm.
It was crazy. But in my heart, I was totally content, had forgiven him, had moved past it, And God refreshed me that day. Just a beautiful story of forgiveness that I got to enjoy and the refreshment through that story. So he took a root of bitterness, flipped it right side up, and refreshed me in forgiveness. So we have a great story of forgiveness today. Two guys that are with us, and we're going to play a video, and then they're going to answer some questions. But these guys are amazing. Eddie Resendez is married to his high school sweetheart, Maribel. They have 3 adult children. Aspen, who is a police officer, Ryan, a senior at Cal State, and their youngest, Jacob, a sophomore at Fresno Pacific University. Eddie was raised in a small town of Lamont, California. Yeah. Graduating from Arvin High School, he eventually moved to the big city of Bakersfield soon after. Eddie started his career with Coca-Cola and is now a realtor in Bakersfield. Eddie started his Christian walk in 2011 and has been on his personal journey with influencers ever since. His passion is sharing the love of Jesus Christ. Eddie knows that his personal gift is tapping men on the shoulder and sharing how God can transform and restore broken and lost men. And with Eddie today is Ben Ruiz. Ben has been married to Patricia for 7 years. I'll give you guys an inside tip. Never, ever, ever, ever believe Ben when he says to call his wife Patty. Only call her Patricia, no matter what he says. They have 2 children, Jordan and Selah, who are 14 and 6. Ben is the owner of a biological company. He helps businesses navigate complex state and federal regulations. But Ben's passions are hunting and fishing and chasing the Lord and bringing as many people as possible on that journey with him. Ben appreciates free T-shirts and will wear the same shirt until holes appear. And if Patricia, not Patty, throws it away. So anyways, listen to their story.
Yeah, so how I remember the story is I was in college. I was going to BC at the time. You go to parties, you go to this stuff, and there just happened to be a bar that was opening, like a grand opening, and everybody had fake IDs or whatever. So we walk in, and I was like, wow, like this is crazy. Like you can't even walk around. This is not even any fun.
So about 25 years ago, my friends and I, and along with my brother, went out to a bar in Bakersfield. My brother was underage, and I was just about 21, 22 years old at the time. So upon arriving at the bar, which was downtown, arriving there, there's different people from different sides of town, and I noticed my brother. Somebody looked at my brother from across the bar, and I could tell my brother was getting agitated from it. And so he starts talking to me. He's like, "Hey, Eddie, there's somebody looking at me, and it's making me upset." And I'm like, "Just leave it alone. It's okay." It was getting crowded in there. It was getting tense inside the room and the bar. So I took a step outside.
Something happened inside where people were just, it was kind of like chaotic for a second. There must have been, I think what had happened is a fight had happened inside. I was like, we better get out of here. And there was kind of some commotion going on, and some people running around, and security guards screaming happening. And so we just literally walked across the street, and I could see my truck. And I remember just, for some reason, I heard just bottles fly by, and they hit the ground, and I was like, what the heck? And I turned around, and there were people that were coming towards us. And I looked over, and a guy that I grew up with, Chris, was like kind of like hiding behind my truck. And I went to tell Chris, like, hey, don't run, we're going to be okay. We have so many friends inside. It's not going to matter what's going to happen. It's going to be whatever. And I turn around, and he's running. So I just immediately catch up to him. And why I even ran is bizarre.
After a few minutes, I heard he hit your brother. He's running away. I look forward, and I see my friends chasing somebody.
We run, and we cut around the back of this building, and I turn and take to break off to the right, and there's a little patch of grass, and I slip in that patch of grass. And I remember trying to gather my balance, and somebody tackled me, and I remember thinking, all right, just curl up tight into a ball, and you're gonna be all right.
Upon turning the corner, arriving there, there's my brother along with three or four other guys. They had the young man on the floor, and they're hitting him. One got a pool stick. I can remember that vividly. Another friend of mine was kicking him, and I see my brother over him punching him.
I remember somebody saying, back up, back up, back up. I'll never forget that. And I remember just like tightening up as tight as I could tighten. I'm thinking, they're gonna shoot me, I'm dead. And somebody would come in and kick me in the head. And then I remember it just being wet. Like I remember just being wet. And I remember it was just like as if rain was falling. And I remember thinking to myself, man, this is it. Like, I can't take much more of this. My just shutting down. And finally somebody kicked me. And at that point, the last time my eardrums popped. And I remember it was just like the sound you hear flatline. It was like, ee!
From a distance, I could hear police. I could hear just loud noises happening. So I'm like, we got to get going. We got to get going. The police are coming. Let's go. And once I see my brother there, he's like, Eddie, I hurt my hand. And we're like, what happened? And I looked down at his hand, and he had cut it. I'm like, how'd you cut your hand? And he's like, I had broke a bottle, and I was hitting the guy with the bottle, cutting him. And so I'm like, holy smokes, we got to get you to the hospital. Upon arriving to the hospital, we're in the waiting room and look over the corridor, and we see friends of the subject that we hurt. And we see them talking to policemen, and they're kind of pointing their finger, and it's like, you know how to go to court? I pled guilty. To some charges, because if I went to jury, I was looking at 20 years in prison. And I'm like, I can't do 20 years in prison. So, you know, I took a plea. But my brother, who did actually injure the gentleman, Ben Ruiz is his name. He did 5.5 years in jail. And my brother lost a lot of his younger years in life.
And then I think a couple days later, I woke up. From that point, I remember, I think I stayed there for, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 days. And then they took me, they were like, hey, you're going to be okay. So you should be able to go home and start, it's going to be a long process to be able to rehab, to be able to ever write again, to be able to ever use your hands again, to be able to do anything again for a long time. And you just build this crazy feeling up of like, dude, I cannot wait to pay these guys back. I'm just thinking like, I'm going to kill these guys. Like, I'm fully going to pay these guys back. And I'm thinking every day is this thing. Like, it was actually the crazy motivator for me to like, I'm getting my hands back. I'm getting this back. Find out where these guys are, and that's what's going to happen.
Fast forward, my wife and I, we got into real estate. The early years of my marriage, or actually a lot of my marriage, I wasn't a great husband at all. I was a great provider, a great dad, and I pretend to be a great husband. But there was a lot of things that I was doing on the side. I found myself divorced. I was ashamed of what I had done, and too prideful, and I couldn't humble myself to speak of it to anybody, including my family. And I found myself in a very dark spot. I never forget, one morning, I had a friend of mine named Jeff Kirby, an acquaintance of mine at the time. He's a good friend now. He approached me at the gym and said, hey, Eddie, you're still selling real estate? And I said, yeah, of course. And I once again put on this face like, yeah, I'm still selling real estate. He's like, well, I'm looking to sell my property. You think maybe you can sell my house? And I'm like, yeah, of course I can sell your house, Jeff. I said, well, Jeff, I'll pray for you. And which up to that point, I'm in my late 30s. I had not prayed for myself. And so I said that, out of just saying that. But he turns around and looks at me. He's like, Eddie, are you a Christian? So he's like, oh, I'm so embarrassed that I haven't asked you to men's group. We meet every Friday at 6 a.m. And internally I'm thinking, great. But out of obligation, I feel like, well, he gave me his business. I better show up, So Friday morning, I show up. There's a gentleman on stage that runs on stage. His name's Les Piercy. He runs on there, and I'm like, oh, that's the guy from the TV. I remember him on TV. I grew up in Lamont. He had a store down the street from me. And he asked, he's like, is anybody new here? Anybody new show up today? And I'm like, raise my hand. And he's like, you come with me. So we come go to a private setting. I'll never forget this because I felt odd to begin with that I was there. And as soon as they finished praying, this gentleman who's sitting across the table starts speaking of his divorce. And he gets emotional. And he's in his late 50s at this time. And he starts talking about the hurts and what he's going through, what he's dealing with. And everything that he's talking about is stuff that I had obviously felt, everything like I can relate, but I had never spoke about it, never spoke of it. And so I started bawling for the first time in years, with that situation that I've been in, my divorce. I just felt, oh my God, it just felt good to cry. And I'm just there soaking it all in. And he's like, well, they're wrapping it up. I'm thinking, let's continue. Like, I felt okay. I was actually excited to be there. Like, this is pretty cool. I couldn't wait. I'm like, well, when do you guys meet again? Next Friday? I couldn't wait for the next Friday. I was super excited for next Friday.
My father and my Uncle Paul always had told me that to go to Montana. We love to hunt and fish, and that was the place. They had never been there, but they had sold me that was the place to ever go. The life of wanting to like kill Eddie and his brother and these things just like kind of, they never went away. But my life, I was like, man, I got to get out of this. I got to get out of Bakersfield. This is bad. I go to Montana and start my life. I go to school there, but my life is constantly in turmoil. It's constant stuff. My cousin Collins was starting to go to church and go to these Bible groups. I really didn't know much about it, but I had a pheasant hunting trip we were going on, and some people canceled. And I was talking to Collins one day in passing. He lived here in Bakersfield, and I was still in Montana. And I said, hey, he said, hey, I think I got some guys that would want to go on that. And I was like, great, cool, you know. And I remember there was a person there, and we're kind of getting everything set up for the day before. And I was like, hey man, what's going on? And this guy says, man, do you know much about these guys that are coming? And I'm like, no, what are you talking about? Dude, these guys are crazy Christians, dude. Bible thumpers. They just, and I was like, what? Like, what are you talking about? You know, and he's like, oh, dude, these guys, it's big time, you know? And I'm like, what I'm thinking to myself, what have I got myself into? This is so not me. And what is this? Sure enough, Les and his crew show up of Bible thumpers, I would say. And I go to this journey group, and I remember I was listening. It was an overnight deal, and we were at this ranch, and all these guys are telling their stories of, you know, their struggles. You know, then that morning, Les is like, "Hey, it's your turn to go," and I'm like, okay, just give them a, you know, give them some of their stuff, because even though you've never done some of that stuff, I started to talk, and then I just remember saying everything I've ever done, and it wasn't what any of them did or said to me, but it was in that moment that I was like, dude, I'm free. There's no more darkness. I remember early, I would be like, God, why did you even let me get to this point? Like, you could have taken me off this earth a long time ago for what I did to your people, like how I hurt. Like, I don't even know why you would forgive me. They say you do, your word, I read it, but why? Like, how? Like, who? What is this? And man, I'm just so in love with God, just so in love with like what he does. And I remember I'm still finishing stuff up in Montana because I messed everything up there completely, just ruined everything I've ever touched. I'm actually going to move back to Bakersfield at the time. I'm actually transitioning already to come back to Bakersfield. Les says to me, you know, let's co-lead with me. And he sends a list to all of us of all these people. And I remember seeing a name on the list, a guy named Eddie. And I remember going, calling Les to be like, hey, who's this guy, Eddie? I recognize the name. He's like, I don't know, man. He said, these people just sign up, and we just, you know, we put them on a list. So we had taken a break. So we get this roster for the new season. And I'm looking at the roster, and there's a lot of names on there. And I see the name Ben Reese. And I'm like, Ben Reese? What could it be? And it said his name, he's from Montana. I'm like, oh, it can't be him. He's from Montana. So I'm looking across. I'm like, could it be? And I gotta remember 18 years had passed. I'm like, it was night whenever, it was dark whenever everything took place. And I'm like, I just couldn't, no, I'm like, no, it's not him. It's not him. And then I thought to myself, wow, I do know this guy. I recognize his name. There's no way. There's just no way. I was like so anxious. Like, I don't even know why I was anxious to ask him. But the time couldn't go any slower during the journey group. So we went through our session, wrapped it up, and I'm getting my Bible and get my stuff put together. And when I look up, I see him coming towards me. I say, hey, Eddie, can I talk to you? And he goes, you Eddie Resendez? And it took a second for me to be like, yeah, I'm Eddie Resendez. And then he said, where are you from? He said, I grew up in Lamont. But it was just, he just wouldn't look at me. He just kept looking down. And as soon as he said where you're from, you know, for some reason, when I'm asked that, I'm like, oh, there's meaning to that when you're where you're from. And I just kept, my heart kept wanting to just jump out of my skin. I felt like it. I was like, this is it. This is him. And I said, hey, you have a brother? And he's like, yeah, my brother Gabriel. Do you know him? And I said, yeah, I know your brother. And he looks up at me. He says, it's you, Ben. It's you. And instantly, I'm like, I said, you're Ben Reese. He's like, I'm Ben Reese. And I said, yeah, Eddie, it's me, man. And I wanted to say the first words to him. And he said, man, the last time I remember seeing you is we just left you in an alley in a pool of blood for dead, man.
And the first thing he says to me is like, man, I'm looking forward to meeting you and hoping to meet your brother.
I said, man, Eddie, it was a long time ago, dude, when you and your brother did that to me. But you're forgiven. And dude, life goes on from this point.
And I'm just overwhelmed with I'm just thinking, what the heck? It's just so I'm just getting this numbness over me or just lost of words. And I'm like looking at him like, what?
The craziest part is I wanted to kill this guy and his brother, but to see those thoughts had never reigned in my head, ever since the moment I met him, the moment I read his name on that list. All those years, that thought never came into my mind. All my thought was I just want to forgive this guy. I want to forgive this guy.
And I was kind of I was just thinking, what the heck just took place right now? And so I walked out and I called my mom, I called my sister, and I called everybody. Like, you won't believe who I met right now. And you won't believe what he told me, that he forgave me, he forgives me, and he loves me.
Well, how can you take something from one spot and 15 years later put two guys in one thing? There's no coincidence with the Lord. He's just that powerful, and then put you both in a group at a church.
And never forget the opportunity that I had to bring my brother to meet him, and my dad to meet him at M24. And I got a chance to introduce them and to see Ben and my brother, shake hands and then hug. And so it's been really neat. It's been really, really neat to be able to share life, at a whole different level with Ben and his family. And
I think how big God is, and his plan was so impeccable with this thing that one day that Eddie and I would do this and become friends, and our families would be friends, and we would hang out, and they would watch our dog when we go out of town and love on us, and that God took such pain, such tragedy, such loss. I say this to people, I've never seen God's face and I've never heard his voice. But man, I have seen his power, like power beyond no avail.
Wow. Eddie, Ben, thanks for sharing your story with us. I've heard that and seen that a number of times, and it never loses its power. It never loses its power. Ben, I see you talk about how you were feeling, after that happened to you, and talking about getting the use of your hands back so you could use them for vengeance. It's visceral, right? I could feel it. I could see it in you. We know the end of the story, which is amazing. But where do you think you'd be today, Ben, if you didn't forgive? Where would you be if you let that vengeance, that bitterness, kind of fester in your soul? Where would you be?
John, I kind of thought about this question a lot, actually, and I could for sure wouldn't be right here where we're at with this situation. I mean, I would be dead. I think I would be dead. I thought a lot of oh yeah, I'd probably be maybe in jail or prison or who knows. But I think I've come to the realization I'd be dead. I wouldn't. I really believe that in some of these moments that the further I've dug into God, that I don't think I could have kept going the direction I was going.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I heard you say, you moved from Bakersfield to Montana. It almost sounded to me like that was an attempt to escape. Like if I get away from this geographically, maybe this pit in my stomach will go away. It didn't work though, huh?
No, you can never change. You can't change. You can only change with the Lord. I could have ran. I could have moved 20 different places, but until God found me, however that took place.
Well, I want to talk to you a minute about that, because that's my favorite part of the story, is when you're sitting there around that table and you're thinking about, hey, I'm going to tell these guys what they want to hear so I can get out of here, right, and never come back again. And I used some words like, I opened my mouth and I said everything I ever did.
All right.
And then you said there was no more darkness, there was freedom. So
how does that happen, right? How does it go from I want to kill this guy to I forgive in my heart? How does that happen?
Yeah, that's interesting. And when I listened to the video, the part I think they cut out little stuff, and I remember sitting there telling the guy like, I remember listening to all the men. There must have been like 17 or 18 men at this thing, and they were talking about their struggles, pornography, infidelity, these things, and I'm just staring at all these guys going, dude, I'm not saying nothing. Like I've done way worse than these guys. Like, this is awesome. These guys are great guys. I mean, and when I was saying that I'm just going to give them some of their stuff, I'm like, this stuff is good. You know what I mean? I'm so much worse than this. And if I tell these guys what I did, they're going to, because I've hurt people, like physically hurt people in my life. And I kept thinking to myself, which was the enemy speaking in my head, Ben, what if it was one of their children? And then they're going to remember who you were. And so I just remember being like, all right, I'm going to sleep. And as soon as everybody goes to sleep, I'm going to fake a sleep that I'm out of here, man. I'm going to get out of here. And then that morning I woke up and that's what happened. I got up and Les said, hey, it's your turn. And I started to talk, and it was a complete lie, like my entire life, to just like say something. And it just all, it all came out. And then it was that feeling where God's like, now, son,
come on,
you're free.
So you experienced his forgiveness of you, and you're then able to forgive a guy like Eddie and his brother, Gabriel. So Eddie, what did it feel like to, I remember this, I was there in this environment when this happened. I remember hearing the buzz of, hey, what's going to go down? It was still like, what's going to happen? And I remember that. So Eddie, what was it like to hear those words from Ben? You said it, you called people, you said, he forgives me, and he said he loves me. What was that like? What has it done to you?
Up to that point in my life, I had never had a man tell me he loves me. And it was rare. I hadn't even had my dad at that point tell me he loves me. And so this was all new to me. The influencers, the group was new to me. It was in my first season. And so I was in a very emotional state at that time. I was an emotional wreck, to be honest with you. So to have this interaction with Ben and him stand in front of me, and I'm looking at the man who for 17 years of my life I blamed for a lot of situations that took place in my life. When there was a certain roadblock in a career path because of my record, I kid you not, I'd be like, that freaking Ben Ruiz, and there was another job opportunity and it wouldn't happen. Well, freaking Ben, so I always had that, a little, that bitterness and anger towards him, because in my mind, the way I had it played out was like, he had that coming to him. That was what I played back over and over. So I was new to my walk. I was just, I was hurt, emotionally hurt. And so I already had a whole bunch in my head and my heart. And then to have that interaction with him, and then him stand in front of me, and then him tell me he forgave me, and then that he loved me, I'm like, it was like overwhelming. It was overwhelming. Like, what is happening in my life right now?
Crazy.
And just, I didn't even know what to say. I'm just looking at him. I just couldn't believe that he was physically standing in front of me, telling me he loves me and has forgiven me. And so I remember taking his hands. I remember taking his hands and looking at his hands because they were the wounds that he had. And I'm like, I just felt so much guilt. There was so much like just emotion that ran through me, but there was no words. I can really speak no words. I'm like, can we talk about this later? I just wanted to actually I wanted to run. Like it's not real.
Surreal, right?
Surreal.
Guys, I hear this story, see this story, and as I was listening to it again between you guys, I thought about a fork in the road, and how that event that night in front of that bar was a fork.
It was.
But really, the fork, the true fork that made the eternal difference is what you did with it 18 years later, right? If you had chosen not to forgive each other, you already said where you would have been, and you probably feel the same way. But
right.
So that fork in the road of forgive or not forgive is so critical. I just see that in you guys. And forgiveness isn't a one and done thing, right? It plays out in our lives since then, right? In our marriages, in our home, in our workplaces, whatever. So I just want to give each of you an opportunity to just share quickly How has that theme of forgiveness changed your life since then in other relationships?
I'll let you go first.
No, I did think about this because I was actually going through a study of the book of Nehemiah, and the question was asked, who have you not forgiven? And so going through my memory bank, all that came to my mind was how I have been forgiven many times over. My offenses, I mean, people who offended me were very minor, and I never had that that need to actually feel like to forgive, because it was like nobody really hurt me. I've always been the bad person in the story. I was thinking back of my life and how I had been the one that's always offended people, and so in that thinking that I'm like, God, you're such an amazing God, such a forgiving God, and there was a point in my life where I'm like, man, I felt like I wasn't punished enough. Like I'm thinking I've done all this bad, but my 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 punishment hasn't been enough. I'm like, this is too good. I'm in an amazing group of men who are loving me, who are just pouring their hands on me and getting me closer to you and teaching me how to walk as a real man. And I had Ben, telling me he forgave me. So I was thinking, thought of God's love, God's love and that ultimate sacrifice of His Son to bear a lot of Eddie's sins,
Come
a
on,
lot of
all of
Eddie's
them.
sins, all of them. And so I just, it just amazes me, and I'm just so thankful. I'm just so thankful where I'm at right now, and it's been, it's all God's hand. And now looking back at it, Tyler mentioned earlier, he's like, he could see around the corner, Eddie. At that moment in time, you feel like it's the worst thing ever, but he knew what was around the corner awaiting me, and that's what God does. That's what a father does.
That's what he does.
That's what a father does. He
He's
just
so
protects.
good.
He protects and loves, and he we're running through the mud for a little bit, but
Yeah.
where I'm at right now, I'm truly thankful.
I know you said early in your story you got divorced. What happened then?
So I got divorced.
Who are you married to now?
So I married my high school sweetheart, and we got divorced for 4 years. She divorced me, rightfully so. She divorced me for not being the husband I should be and who I was called to be. And so through the journey and through the process of my my walk and understanding what I was to be called as a man and a leader of the household, we got remarried.
Come on.
3.5 years ago, we got remarried. It has not been easy. It has not been an easy process. But I'm willing to, just the simple fact that we get that opportunity, to make things right and to honor God through the process. It's worth the fight.
Come on.
It's worth the fight.
Love you, brother.
Yeah. Thank you.
Ben, how about you? How's forgiveness continued to play out in your life since then?
Man, that's a very challenging question. I actually don't even really want to answer that question because
Sorry.
no, I know. It seems like I get really hard questions and Eddie gets really easy ones. So
I asked him the same thing.
Yeah, I know, but it's just he's got a better answer than me. So no, you guys, I can only say that this forgiveness thing it's crazy and it's tough. I mean, I truly I'm exhausted. I can tell you that that we relived that video and walked down there, and I remember standing where his brother said, I remember where it all happened. We're standing in this spot where I was left, and I just thought of what came into my mind at that point was my heart. God said, Ben, do you see? Can you hear me? My word is alive. And he said, I make all things good.
Whoa.
All things good. And I don't, you know the verse better than I do, but I hit it on my phone because I thought of it this morning and it says, and when you know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his word. And that night, that was pure evil. But I was evil too. But God turned everything and made it for his good. And he said, Ben, my word is alive and you've just saw it with your own eyes.
Come on.
And you guys, I can tell you, even in this moment, it's the hardest times of my life. And I love the Lord with all my heart. I serve the Lord with all my heart. And, I've had to have some big forgiveness in the last little bit. For forgiving my wife for things that have happened. But even more recently, in these moments that I'm here today, you know, I own a company and a man that I love with all my heart, who's like he's my general manager of my company, fell off and got sideways with drugs while he's running my company. And I look and I'm like, God, what do I do? And he's like, Ben, you forgive him and you keep moving. And he's here today, still working for me. And God is like, and I'm a table servant that serves people today. And I have to serve this man. And I said, God, am I not humble enough that now you make me serve this man? And he says, my heart is, no, Ben, you're not humble enough that you even have to ask me for that. Sometimes, you guys, we have to forgive. We're the most merciless people, but God wants us to have mercy on everyone. And so it never stops, but I'll never stop serving the King. Just in a way.
Forgiveness is messy, right? And it's hard. It's tough. But boy, there's freedom in it, right? There's power in it. And guys, thank you for sharing God's story of forgiveness in your lives. That's what it is. It's his story. It's really not yours. It's his story of grace and forgiveness through your lives. So thank you for sharing. And men, what we want to do now, as I mentioned earlier, is we want to pause for just a minute, and we're just going to take a moment of silence in our own minds and think about this theme of forgiveness. Maybe ask the Holy Spirit, where is this theme relevant right now in my heart, in my mind? So we're going to pray individually, I think, and then I'll pray us out of that time. Father, we love because you loved us first. We're only able to forgive because you've forgiven me. As Eddie said, offenses against me are so small when they compare them against my sins against you. So, Father, thank you for your forgiveness, for your grace, for your mercy, for your kindness that you showed in Jesus on the cross.